Cale Draven looked like any other student at the Academy of Light. He wore the same plain tunic, carried the same datapad, and walked through the same shining corridors as his classmates. To anyone who saw him, he was just another boy eager to learn about the galaxy. But behind his calm face, Cale carried a secret heavier than any textbook. He was the son of the most feared warlord the galaxy had ever known. His father's name, Lord Draven, still echoed in the stars. Entire fleets had once trembled when his banners appeared. Worlds had surrendered without a fight, afraid of his cruelty and his brilliance in battle. But Lord Draven was gone now, and his empire had fallen into dust. Cale had been sent to this academy to hide, to grow in peace, and to live far from the blood and fire of his father's legacy. Yet Cale could never forget who he was. When he sat in lectures about strategy and diplomacy, he listened carefully but not like the others. For him, these were not just lessons. They were memories, whispers of the life he had once seen as a child. He remembered watching his father's war maps, the flashing symbols of ships moving like pieces on a board. He remembered the voices of commanders begging for orders, the sound of decisions that could end thousands of lives. But here in the academy, no one saw that side of him. His classmates called him quiet, kind, and thoughtful. They often asked him for help with their studies, and he always answered with patience. When others laughed, he smiled softly, though his eyes often carried a distant look as if he were somewhere else, somewhere far beyond the academy walls. Cale wanted to live like them. He wanted to be free of the shadow of his father. He wanted to dream of journeys, of stars, of friendships unbroken by war. But fate did not forget the blood he carried. One afternoon, as he sat in the main hall with hundreds of other students, a message from the Intergalactic Council was broadcast. The voice of the speaker was calm, but the words shook Cale to his core. "The Midway Cluster has fallen into chaos," the voice said. "Pirates, mercenaries, and rogue fleets now fight for control. The Council seeks leaders, commanders, and strategists to protect innocent lives and restore peace." The room filled with whispers. Some students were excited at the news of adventure. Others were frightened at the thought of war spreading so close. Cale sat still, but his heart beat heavily. The Midway Cluster had once been the crown jewel of his father's empire. Now it burned in conflict, and he knew that old loyalties would rise again. That evening, Cale walked through the academy gardens. The twin suns were sinking low, painting the towers in gold. He felt the beauty around him. Yet he could not escape the thought that somewhere people were dying under the fire of ships. He thought of his father's empire, broken but not forgotten. He thought of the enemies who might still seek revenge. And he thought of the council who surely must know who he was. Cale touched the edge of the datapad in his hand. His father had left him nothing but memories and a name. But that name was enough to stir fear and hope across the galaxy. He did not want to be a warlord. He did not want to bring destruction. But what if the galaxy no longer saw him as a student? What if it saw him as an heir to power, whether he liked it or not? As the night deepened, Cale stood under the stars. He whispered to himself, "I am not him. I am not my father." But in the silent heavens above, the stars gave no answer. Somewhere out there, fleets gathered, alliances shifted, and the galaxy waited. And though Cale wished only to remain a student, destiny was already moving toward him. To some, he was a boy with a datapad. To others, he was the shadow of a legend. But to the galaxy, he was the heir of a warlord. The days after the Council's message felt heavy for Cale. The academy halls, once full of laughter and chatter, now carried whispers of war. Students gathered in small groups discussing rumors about battles in the Midway Cluster. Some dreamed of joining the Council's fleets to prove themselves. Others spoke with fear, imagining their worlds falling into chaos. Cale stayed quiet. He walked with his datapad pressed close to his chest, pretending to focus on studies. But inside his mind was restless. He could not stop thinking about the Midway Cluster. It was once his father's pride, a region his fleets had guarded with unshakable strength. Now pirates and mercenaries tore it apart. Cale wondered if the galaxy would ever let the name Draven rest. One night, while the academy slept, Cale received an encrypted message on his datapad. The hologram flickered and an older man's face appeared. Cale froze. He knew this man. It was Commander Talus, his father's most loyal officer. His voice was firm, filled with years of war. "Cale Draven," Talus said, his eyes sharp as steel. The Midway cluster is collapsing. Old banners are rising again. Soldiers who once swore to your father now wait for a leader. They wait for you. The council cannot hold the cluster alone. They need someone who carries both the name and the blood to unite the scattered. Kyle's throat tightened. I am only a student, he whispered. I don't want war. Talus looked at him with sadness. You don't choose war, Kyle. War chooses you. The galaxy does not see a boy holding a datapad. It sees the heir of Draven. Whether you want it or not, your name commands loyalty, and your silence will only create more death. The hologram faded, but Talus's words burned in Kale's chest. He sat awake all night staring at the stars beyond his window. Could he really stand against fleets, pirates, and warlords? Could a student become the leader they wanted? He thought of his father, ruthless, brilliant, feared by all. Kale was not like him. He was softer, gentler, yet somewhere deep inside he felt the same fire stirring. The next day, Kale entered the tactical simulation room. It was usually empty at night, but Kale needed answers. He activated the holographic battles, facing scenarios of space warfare. His fingers moved across the controls, guiding ships, predicting enemy attacks, and forming strategies. At first he hesitated, but as the simulations grew harder, Kale's instincts took over. He remembered how his father studied the battlefield, how he turned chaos into order. Kyle began to do the same. His commands were calm, precise, and almost natural. The simulations declared victory after victory, even against impossible odds. Kale stared at the results, his heart pounding. Perhaps he had inherited more than just his father's name, but it frightened him. Was this who he was meant to be? A boy of peace who carried the blood of war. That evening, Kale walked through the academy gardens again. The flowers swayed in the breeze and the twin suns lit the horizon. Students laughed nearby, free of worry, their lives simple and bright. Kyle wanted to join them, to forget the weight on his shoulders, but his mind was full of fleets and fire. When night fell, Kale dreamed of burning skies. He saw ships locked in battle, worlds crying for help, and his father's shadow standing behind him. In the dream, soldiers turned to Kale, waiting for his command. He woke up with tears in his eyes, his chest heavy with fear and duty. Kale knew he could not hide forever. The galaxy would not let him. Already the whispers of his name were spreading. Already eyes were turning toward him. He was still a student in the academy, but to the galaxy he was becoming something more. He was the shadow of a warlord's heir, and the storm of destiny was drawing closer with every passing day. Kale tried to keep his life quiet, but fate did not allow him that peace. Only a week after Commander Talus's message, the skies above Leora filled with fire. A rogue fleet of raiders had broken through the planet's defenses. Their goal was simple: to test the Academy's strength and perhaps capture valuable hostages. The alarm rang across the Academy. Students ran through the halls in fear, while instructors tried to lead them into safe shelters. Kale felt his chest tighten as red lights flashed above him. He wanted to hide like everyone else. He wanted to believe he was only a student, but his instincts refused to stay silent. He ran toward the Academy's control chamber. The room was crowded with instructors who struggled to manage the defense drones. Their voices were panicked, their movements clumsy. Kale saw the battle maps on the screens, the raider ships moving quickly, circling like wolves. Without thinking, Kyle stepped forward. "You are predicting their path wrong," he said firmly. The instructors turned in shock. No student had the right to enter this place, let alone give commands. But Kale's eyes were sharp, filled with the same fire his father once carried. "If you deploy the drones there, they will cut you off. You must flank them from the south corridor and use the orbital cannons together. Do it now, or the raiders will breach the academy walls." There was hesitation, but one older instructor whispered, "Try his plan. We are losing already." The commands were followed. Kale's strategy unfolded like a hidden map. The drones struck from unexpected angles, trapping the raiders in crossfire. The orbital cannons fired in unison, tearing through the enemy's largest ships. Within minutes, the attack began to collapse. The raiders retreated, leaving behind wreckage in the skies. Silence filled the control chamber. The instructors stared at Kale with wide eyes. Some were shocked, some suspicious, but most were in awe. "How did you know?" one asked. Kyle lowered his gaze. His heart was still racing, but his voice was steady. "I studied strategy. That is all." But they knew it was more than study. No normal student could predict a battle so clearly under such pressure. When the danger passed, Kale walked back through the academy halls. "Students, whispered as he passed. They had heard of his role in saving them. Some looked at him with admiration, others with fear. A few even bowed slightly as if he were more than one of them. That night, Cale sat alone in his room. His hands trembled as he remembered the way he had spoken, the way he had commanded. It had felt natural, almost frighteningly so. He had wanted to be only a student, but in that moment he had been something else, something larger. He thought of his father again. Lord Draven had been a master of battles, his mind sharper than any blade. Cale remembered standing as a child behind the great war maps, watching his father command with calm authority. Was it possible that the same gift lived within him? Kyle buried his face in his hands. "I am not him," he whispered. But his heart refused to agree. Deep inside, he knew that part of his father's strength flowed through his blood, and when the galaxy called, he had answered, even without meaning to. As the stars glittered outside his window, Cale felt the weight of destiny pressing closer. The galaxy would not let him remain hidden. His first test had come and he had passed it. But it was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, enemies had noticed. Somewhere out there, allies had seen the spark of a leader. And as whispers spread across the stars, the name Draven began to rise again, spoken not as a memory of the past, but as a promise of the future. The academy was never the same after the raid. Whispers followed Cale wherever he went. Students who once saw him as quiet and ordinary now stared at him with wide eyes. Some admired him, calling him a genius. Others avoided him as if his very presence carried danger. But all of them agreed on one thing. Cale Draven was not just a student anymore. Even the instructors changed their tone. They questioned him more during strategy classes, almost testing his mind. And whenever Cale spoke, his answers carried weight. He no longer sounded like a boy learning theories. He sounded like someone who had already stood in the fire of battle. But Cale did not feel proud. He felt trapped. The more people noticed his talent, the more he felt the shadow of his father pressing down on him. Every time someone whispered the name Draven, Cale's chest grew heavier. He had promised himself he would not walk the same path of war, yet it seemed the galaxy would not let him escape. One evening, as Cale walked alone in the gardens, he found himself staring at the twin suns sinking below the horizon. The air was cool, the flowers glowing faintly under the light. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I only wanted peace." A voice behind him replied, calm but firm, "Peace is not given, Cale, it is built." Cale turned quickly. It was Commander Talus again, this time in person. His armor was worn, his face marked with scars of countless battles. Yet his eyes carried respect, not judgment. "You should not be here," Cale said softly. Talus stepped closer. "And you should not be hiding. The raid proved what I already knew. You have your father's mind, but you also have something he never had, mercy. That makes you more dangerous than he ever was, Cale." Cale looked away. "I don't want to be dangerous. I don't want their fear. I don't want their loyalty. I just want to be a student." "But the galaxy has already chosen you," Talus answered. "The Midway cluster burns. People are dying because no leader stands to unite them. You cannot change your blood, Cale. You cannot run from your name. The question is not whether you will lead, but what kind of leader you will be." The words struck deep. Cale felt anger and sorrow rise in him. He wanted to shout that it was unfair, that he never asked for this. But his voice broke, and instead he whispered, "I am not ready." Talus placed a hand on his shoulder. "No leader is ever ready. They become ready when others depend on them." For a long moment, Cale stood in silence, hearing the gentle wind in the garden. His heart ached. He thought of the academy students who had survived the raid because of his commands. He thought of the Midway cluster, where innocents now cried for help. He thought of his father's shadow waiting to swallow him whole. Finally, Cale raised his eyes to the stars. They seemed endless, cold, and watchful. And yet among them he felt a spark inside himself, small but growing. He turned back to Talus. "If I choose this path," he said quietly, "I must never become him. I must be different." Talus bowed his head. "Then you will not be the shadow of Draven. You will be the heir who brings light where he brought fire." That night Cale could not sleep. His mind was a storm of fear and hope. He still longed to be a simple student, but he knew the truth now. The galaxy would never let him hide. His name was a weight, yes, but it was also a key. And somewhere deep inside, Cale felt his heart harden with a decision. He could not escape the war to come, but maybe, just maybe, he could shape it into something better than the galaxy expected. The decision Cale had made in the garden weighed on him every day. He still wore the simple tunic of a student, still carried his datapad, and still attended classes. But inside he was no longer the same. Each word from his instructors, each map of galactic politics, felt like preparation for something far greater. The whispers of his name had already spread beyond the academy. Across the stars, mercenary groups began asking if the son of Draven had returned. Old soldiers who once served under Lord Draven sent quiet signals waiting for a leader. Even enemies of his father stirred, uneasy at the thought that his bloodline still lived. One morning, Cale stood before the mirror in his quarters. He touched the reflection of his face, young, gentle, still carrying the softness of a boy. Yet his eyes betrayed him. They were sharp, filled with the same fire that had burned in his father's gaze. Cale closed his eyes and whispered, "I will not be him. I will be better." That day, the academy held a training exercise. Students were placed in different teams, each commanding simulated fleets. The goal was to outmaneuver and defeat the others. Many students saw it as a game, a chance to prove their intelligence. But for Cale, it was more than a game. It was practice for the galaxy itself. When the simulation began, Cale stayed quiet at first, listening to his team argue. They shouted orders, confused and disorganized, their ships quickly falling into traps. Cale could not stay silent. His voice cut through the noise, calm, steady, and commanding. "Divide into 3 wings," he said. "Force them to chase the center, then strike from both flanks. Timing is everything." His teammates hesitated, but something in his tone made them obey. The battle unfolded exactly as Cale predicted. Their enemies were lured into a trap and crushed. Within minutes, Kyle's team stood victorious. The instructors looked at each other with surprise. Students cheered his name, some in admiration, others in fear. They had seen him do it once during the real raid, but now they saw it again. This was no accident. Cale Draven carried the blood of strategy, the gift of leadership. That evening, Cale walked through the academy corridors. Students stepped aside as he passed. No one dared mock him or treat him as ordinary anymore. To them, he was no longer just a boy with a datapad. He was becoming something larger, something dangerous. But Cale did not feel proud. He felt the storm building around him. With every victory, the galaxy watched him more closely. With every command, he stepped deeper into his father's shadow. Later that night, Cale received another message from Commander Tallis. This time it was urgent. The hologram showed battles raging in the Midway cluster, worlds burning, fleets collapsing. "The Council cannot hold them back," Tallis said. "The people are desperate, Cale. They call for a leader. They call for you. If you remain silent, the cluster will fall into endless darkness." Kyle stared at the flickering images of war. His chest ached. He wanted to look away, but he could not. He saw children crying in ruined streets, saw ships full of refugees fleeing across the stars. His hands trembled as he whispered, "Why me? I'm not ready." Tallis's voice softened. "You are more ready than you know. You saved your academy. You guided your classmates. And you carry both wisdom and mercy. That is why the galaxy needs you." When the message ended, Cale sat in silence. His heart was heavy with fear, but also burning with something else, resolve. He could not hide anymore. The storm was rising, and it was calling his name. He might still look like a student, but to the galaxy, he was becoming the heir of a warlord. And soon he would have to choose whether to rise into that role or watch the galaxy burn without him. The days that followed were restless for Cale. The academy still looked the same from the outside, towers shining under the twin suns, students walking with datapads, laughter filling the courtyards. But for Cale, the peace felt fragile, like glass ready to break. Every whisper of war, every news broadcast about the Midway cluster pressed against his heart. He tried to tell himself he was not ready. He tried to believe he could stay here, safe among students, learning quietly. But each time he looked into the mirror, the truth stared back at him. He no longer saw only a boy. He saw the spark of a leader, whether he wanted it or not. One evening, Cale stood alone on the academy's highest balcony. The stars stretched across the sky like endless silver rivers. He remembered his childhood, standing beside his father in dark command halls, watching fleets move across war maps. He remembered his father's voice, cold, commanding, unshakable. But Kale also remembered the fear in people's eyes, the silence in halls where laughter never existed, the way his father's victories always came with broken worlds. Kale clenched his fist. "I will not be him," he whispered. "If I lead, I will lead differently." As if the stars were listening, another transmission reached him that night. It was from the council itself. A woman with tired eyes appeared in the hologram. "Kale Draven," she said, her voice both formal and pleading. "We know who you are. We know the blood you carry. The Midway cluster is falling and our fleets are breaking. We do not ask you to be your father. We ask you to be something better. Will you come?" Kale's breath caught. The council knew. There was no hiding anymore. He felt fear wrap around him, but under it he also felt something else, a strange strength waiting to rise. The next day he walked through the academy halls in silence. Students stared at him as if they knew something was changing. His closest classmates approached him, their faces full of questions. "Kale," one of them said softly, "are the stories true? Are you really his son?" Kale looked at them with honest eyes. For the first time, he did not hide. "Yes," he said quietly, "I am his son, but I am not him." There was silence, but then his classmate placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then prove it. Show the galaxy you are different." Those words struck Kale deeply. They were simple, but they gave him courage. That night, Kyle went to meet Commander Talus in a hidden chamber beneath the academy. The old warrior bowed slightly as Kale entered. "The fleets are ready," Talus said. "Not strong, but loyal. They wait for your command. The council waits too. The choice is yours." Kale's heart pounded. He stood still for a long moment, then finally spoke. His voice trembled at first, but grew steadier with each word. "I will not lead as my father did. I will not rule by fear. If I rise, it will be to protect, not to conquer." Talus smiled, his scarred face softening. "Then you will be more than his heir. You will be what the galaxy has never seen before." As Kale left the chamber, he felt the weight of destiny settle on his shoulders. It was heavy, yes, but it no longer crushed him. For the first time, he carried it with resolve. He still looked like a student in his simple tunic, but the galaxy was beginning to see something else. They saw the heir of a warlord, not bound by the past, but shaping a new future. And soon Kale knew the storm would arrive. When it did, he would not hide. He would stand. The stars above the Midway cluster burned with war. Fleets clashed in endless fire, and entire worlds cried for rescue. The council's forces were broken, their ships scattered. Pirates and mercenaries ruled the skies, and every passing hour brought new suffering. The galaxy whispered that no one could save the cluster. But then a single name spread like a spark in the dark. Draven. The heir of a warlord had come. Kale. Draven stood on the bridge of a warship for the first time. His hands trembled as he touched the command table, but his eyes were steady. Around him, soldiers and officers who had once followed his father now stood waiting. They looked at him with hope, not fear. For though Kale carried the same blood, he carried a different spirit. "Commander," Talus said beside him, "the enemy believes you are untested. They think you are only a boy. They will not take you seriously." Kale nodded slowly. His voice was calm, though his heart thundered in his chest. "Then let them underestimate me. We will show them what a Draven can become." The battle began. Enemy fleets swarmed, confident they would crush this small force. But Kale's mind lit with clarity. He moved ships like pieces of a living puzzle, predicting the enemy's path before they even struck. He gave orders with precision, guiding his fleet to strike not with brute force but with intelligence and mercy. Where his father would have burned worlds to ash, Kyle ordered protection for civilians first. Where his father would have crushed enemies without thought, Kale offered surrender before destruction. And yet when he fought, his strikes were sharp and unshakable. The raider fleets broke one by one, caught in traps they never saw coming. On the bridge, the soldiers began to cheer. "Draven, Draven!" they cried, their voices full of pride. Kyle felt tears sting his eyes. They did not cheer for fear as they had for his father. They cheered because they believed in him. In that moment, Kale understood. He was no longer just a student, no longer just the shadow of his father. He was a leader in his own right. Hours later, the battle ended. The skies of the Midway cluster were clear, the enemy driven away. Refugee ships were guided safely to ports, their people stepping out in tears of relief. Everywhere Kale went, eyes followed him with gratitude. For the first time, the cluster had hope again. That night, Kale stood alone on the warship's balcony looking at the stars. His simple student tunic was gone, replaced with the uniform of a commander. Yet inside, he still felt like the boy who once carried a datapad through quiet academy halls. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "I am not him. I never will be. I am Kale." Behind him, Commander Talus approached. "They are waiting for your next command," he said. "The council, the soldiers, even the people. They will follow you wherever you lead." Kale turned, his eyes steady with new strength. "Then we will lead them to peace. We will fight only when we must and protect those who cannot protect themselves. The galaxy will not fear the name Draven anymore. It will hope." Talus bowed deeply, his voice thick with emotion. "Then you are not your father's heir of fire. You are the heir of light." And so across the galaxy the story began to spread. A boy who looked like a student had stood against the storm. He carried the blood of a warlord, but he chose a different path. To the galaxy he was Kale Draven, the leader who turned fear into faith and the heir who gave hope to the stars.